Thomas Massie just ambushed FBI Director Kash Patel with the government's own suppressed evidence, exposing a devastating institutional paralysis that cannot be ignored. 20 specific identities reside within official FBI FD 302 reports. Victims explicitly and repeatedly named these individuals on the official record, yet the Bureau has not initiated a single investigation into any of them. This assertion is not a baseless theory. It is a factual reality established under oath during a congressional hearing. Pause for a moment and fully process the gravity of that situation. When victims sit across from federal agents, providing specific identities, detailed accounts, and corroborating context, and agents formally document those declarations, a predictable sequence of events should follow. In virtually any other criminal scenario, this accumulation of raw intelligence serves as the genesis of an investigation, not its conclusion. However, in this specific instance, the investigative process terminated before it ever officially commenced. What unfolded was not a product of bureaucratic confusion, simple miscommunication, or administrative delay. It represented a catastrophic collision between documented victim testimony and institutional obstinance, playing out live inside the House Judiciary Committee. Representative Thomas Massie sat opposite Kash Patel and meticulously forced this glaring contradiction directly into the public record. Massie did not enter that hearing armed with speculative theories. He arrived armed with incontrovertible receipts. He had observed Patel testifying before the Senate the previous day, where the director calmly asserted that no credible intelligence existed, indicating Jeffrey Epstein operated a broader trafficking network. Patel claimed there were no additional names and no wider systemic operation. Consequently, Massie executed a remarkably simple yet devastatingly effective maneuver. He recited Patel's exact Senate testimony back to him while under oath, permanently anchoring the director's position before systematically dismantling it. Massie then introduced the pivotal element that entirely shifts the paradigm, the Southern District of New York investigation initiated in 2019. This was not the heavily constrained Florida case from 2006 to 2007 that Patel had previously referenced as a shield. This constituted a completely distinct legal case within a separate jurisdiction, possessing an independent body of evidence that prominently features FBI 302 reports. These formal interview summaries meticulously capture the unfiltered declarations of the victims. According to these official documents, the survivors absolutely did not depict a lone predator. They vividly described an expansive network. They identified a minimum of 20 men. They provided specific individuals and easily identifiable figures. Massie explicitly named one individual, Jess Staley, the former chief executive officer of Barclays. He subsequently expanded the scope without vocalizing every single identity, referencing a Hollywood producer, a royal prince, a towering figure within the music industry, a prominent international banker, a government official, a former politician, the owner of an Italian automotive company, a legendary rock star, a magician, and at least 6 billionaires, including one hailing from Canada. These descriptions are not nebulous illusions. They represent precise categories perfectly capable of identifying actual human beings residing within the FBI's classified archives. Massie clarified his position perfectly. He might not possess every individual name, but the Federal Bureau of Investigation absolutely does. Consider the fundamental logic breaking down at this exact juncture. If these identities exist within validated FBI documentation, and if those reports stem directly from survivor testimony, the core debate no longer revolves around whether the intelligence exists. The central inquiry shifts entirely to how the FBI utilized that gathered intelligence. Therefore, Massie posed the only relevant question. He asked if Patel had launched any investigations into these specific figures, and whether the director had personally reviewed those critical 302 documents. Patel's response noticeably avoided denying the existence of the reports. He did not contest the reported number of 20 men, nor did he dispute the fact that victims provided explicit names. Instead, he executed a calculated pivot. He declared that the FBI is currently reviewing all available materials. He maintained that any credible intelligence would inherently trigger comprehensive investigations. He then delivered the defining sentence of the entire confrontation, stating that no new materials had been presented to him that would adequately justify a fresh indictment. Analyze the implications of that profound statement. survivor statements are real. They are officially documented. They identify no fewer than 20 specific people. Yet, the official institutional posture maintains that this mountain of evidence somehow fails to reach the required threshold of credible information. This begs the obvious question regarding what actually qualifies as a credible standard. Massie identified this logical void instantly and refused to let the evasion stand. He aggressively pressed the issue, questioning whether the agency implicitly considered the victims themselves to lack credibility. If formal survivor declarations cannot successfully trigger a preliminary investigation, classifying the victims as unreliable remains the only logical deduction available. Patel refused to personally own that grim conclusion, choosing instead to deflect responsibility. He argued that these determinations were rendered by numerous United States attorneys' offices spanning 3 distinct presidential administrations. He framed the inaction not as a singular failure, but as a compounding chain of systemic decisions repeated consistently over a vast timeline. This defense mechanism transforms the narrative entirely. When institutional responsibility is diluted across multiple regional offices, spanning numerous years and changing political administrations, a disturbing phenomenon occurs. No solitary individual owns the final outcome, ensuring that no single official can ever face genuine accountability. This strategic diffusion of responsibility is far from accidental. It is a deeply embedded structural feature. The exact moment you attempt to identify the ultimate decision maker, the institutional answer morphs into everyone, which practically translates into no one. This impenetrable dynamic is precisely how massive bureaucratic systems insulate themselves from consequences. Massie relentlessly tightened his interrogative focus. He shifted attention away from the ambiguous system and past administrations, zeroing in directly on one tangible category of evidence, the FD 302 reports. This represents the raw material, the absolute closest representation of unfiltered survivor testimony possessed by the Bureau. He delivered a blunt inquiry, asking Patel if he had personally reviewed those specific documents. Patel offered a definitive negative response. He did not claim a partial review or a selective reading. The answer was an uncompromising no. He attempted to clarify that the broader institution had evaluated the files, noting that lower-level agents, various prosecutors, and preceding offices had processed the material. Nevertheless, the sitting director of the FBI, the man currently testifying under oath regarding the presence or absence of credible intelligence, confessed he had never personally examined the critical documents containing the perpetrators' names. Allow the weight of that admission to fully register. The fundamental meaning of his previous testimony instantly transforms. His assertion shifts from a definitive declaration that no credible information exists to a hollow admission that subordinates merely informed him that no credible information exists. These two statements possess vastly different legal, logical, and ethical ramifications. Massie did not require elevated volume to underscore his point. The glaring contradiction resonated loudly throughout the chamber. If leadership refuses to read the primary evidence, they cannot logically dismiss its validity. If leadership fails to evaluate the core testimony, they lack the capacity to adjudicate its ultimate credibility. At this juncture, the congressional hearing fundamentally pivoted away from basic fact-finding and ventured into much darker territory. Investigative credibility is never predetermined in a vacuum. It must be rigorously tested through active operational work. Proper protocol dictates comparing statements, hunting for corroborating elements, scrutinizing international travel logs, tracing complex financial transfers, dissecting communication networks, and establishing irrefutable timelines. Investigators simply do not discard provided identities before this mandatory verification process even commences. However, based directly on Patel's sworn testimony, this foundational verification process never materialized. The names are securely archived, the testimonies are safely stored, the documentation is completely intact. Despite all this, the basic investigative trigger remained untouched. We must ask what specific operational standard the Bureau is choosing to apply. In virtually every comparable federal inquiry, a victim's statement containing specific identities provides more than enough justification to launch a preliminary probe. The goal is not immediate conviction or instant charges, but simply to initiate the pursuit of truth. This critical distinction is paramount because Patel constructed his entire defensive perimeter around prosecutorial standards, focusing solely on what lawyers can prove beyond a reasonable doubt in a courtroom. Massie, conversely, focused squarely on investigative standards, questioning what base intelligence justifies merely opening a case file. Blurring these two vastly different operational thresholds is the exact mechanism bureaucrats utilize to justify absolute paralysis. Patel then introduced a supplementary defensive layer. He reiterated that multiple prosecutors across 3 administrations reviewed identical intelligence and arrived at a uniform conclusion, resulting in 0 charges, 0 viable prosecutions, and 0 tangible action. Superficially, this narrative projects an image of institutional reinforcement, suggesting rigorous independent review leading to consistent legal agreement. A closer examination shatters this illusion. This particular argument falsely assumes that every single review was conducted under identical circumstances. It incorrectly presupposes that all offices possess the exact same evidentiary pool, prioritized the same objectives, and operated free from identical external pressures. Furthermore, it relies on the massive, unexplained logical leap that an inability to immediately prosecute equates flawlessly to a total lack of underlying credibility. Massie refused to grant Patel this rhetorical concession. He narrowed the parameters once more, forcing Patel to confirm that these various offices explicitly reviewed the 302S. After Patel agreed, Massie unleashed the inevitable follow-up inquiry. If prosecutors reviewed documents containing explicit identities provided directly by survivors and no subsequent investigations materialized, what precise actions did the agency take regarding that explosive intelligence? Patel failed to produce a coherent answer. Instead, the dialogue wandered aimlessly into bureaucratic policy jargon, focusing on institutional norms and standard Department of Justice disclosure protocols. Patel cited the paramount importance of victim privacy and the necessity of avoiding the public release of unverified allegations. While these represent genuinely valid legal concerns, they utterly failed to address the fundamental issue at hand. Nobody in that committee room demanded the public broadcasting of those 20 names. Nobody requested the unethical exposure of the survivors. The actual question was far simpler and infinitely more uncomfortable. Did the Bureau ever actually investigate the named individuals? And if they chose not to, what is the justification? This is precisely where the FBI's defensive framing began to fracture. Safeguarding the identities of victims is entirely distinct from refusing to pursue their alleged abusers. These are 2 fundamentally separate institutional responsibilities. During this exchange, Patel aggressively blended these concepts together, attempting to use one noble duty to camouflage the complete abandonment of another. This tactic fails under scrutiny. Once this crucial distinction crystallizes, the FBI's defensive posture ceases to resemble prudent caution and strongly resembles calculated avoidance. If a massive federal agency possesses the formidable capacity to extract statements, document specific identities, and preserve the resulting records, only to abruptly halt all momentum, the problem is clearly not a lack of operational capacity. The problem is a deliberate institutional choice. This deliberate choice became impossible to ignore when Massie executed a brilliant pivot, slicing straight through the dense legal vocabulary and procedural armor. He focused directly on the concept of access, questioning who receives an audience, who faces rejection, and what those decisions reveal about the agency's true priorities. Massie maintained his measured tone during this transition. He required no theatrical volume because the impending contrast possessed enough inherent sharpness to decimate everything Patel had previously argued. This new line of inquiry bypassed legal thresholds, prosecutorial discretion, and interagency memos entirely. It centered exclusively on determining exactly who the FBI considers worthy of their time. Massie highlighted a highly publicized White House event where Attorney General Pam Bondi distributed binders full of sensitive material to prominent social media influencers. She did not distribute this intelligence to seasoned investigators or the actual victims. She handed it to internet personalities whose entire operational model relies upon sensationalized amplification rather than diligent verification. After Patel confirmed his personal attendance at this specific event, Massie delivered a singular question that fundamentally reframed the entire congressional proceeding. He asked the director if he was perfectly willing to engage with internet influencers actively profiting from these tragedies. Would he commit to sitting down with the actual victims? This ceased being a complex legal inquiry and transformed into a profound moral test. It impacted the room differently because all prior discussions centered on the Bureau's alleged limitations, what they legally cannot release, and how they cannot act without flawless intelligence. This new question exposed what they actively choose not to do. Massie challenged Patel to physically meet the individuals who provided the identities, to look them in the eye, and to absorb their harrowing accounts directly, devoid of sanitized summaries or heavily processed internal memorandums. He demanded direct, unfiltered accountability. Patel flatly refused to make that basic commitment. He retreated once again into the comforting embrace of institutional terminology. He vaguely promised that the agency would gladly meet with anyone possessing novel intelligence, assuring the committee that designated professionals would manage the interactions and the established system would process the data. Massie, however, was not inquiring about the faceless system. He was challenging the director personally. He repeated his demand for a personal meeting, yet the direct answer never materialized. Patel's response dissolved entirely into a cloud of delegation, bureaucratic procedure, and emotional distance. This calculated distance proves highly significant, especially considering that this exact same institution, the one currently using victim privacy as an impenetrable shield, recently admitted to releasing documents with such reckless speed that several victims suffered improper rédaction. Massie stated this fact with brutal clarity, noting that a rushed, politically motivated release unlawfully exposed these names, causing immense distress among the survivors. The institutional hypocrisy suddenly sharpened into focus. The agency eagerly weaponizes privacy as an excuse to withhold information and paralyze investigations when convenient. Simultaneously, they casually compromise that exact same privacy whenever rapid document releases serve a beneficial political narrative. The public must ask which priority truly reigns supreme. Is the protection of victims a sacred institutional pillar or merely a situational convenience? A federal agency cannot logically invoke privacy to justify total inaction while simultaneously failing to secure that privacy during critical moments. That behavior is not consistent policy execution. It is the definition of selective application. At this stage, the parameters of the hearing expanded significantly beyond the core scandal. Massie aggressively pushed the narrative past the victims and the withheld documents, steering directly into the most radioactive question hovering over the entire saga for years, the alleged intelligence community connections. Earlier in the session, official documents entered the record containing statements from Alexander Acosta, which strongly suggested the primary suspect belonged to intelligence networks. The record included references to potential CIA affiliations, documented meetings with high-ranking intelligence officials, and undeniable operational patterns that, at a bare minimum, demand rigorous scrutiny. Massie launched a direct assault asking Patel if he had aggressively investigated any potential CIA connections, if he had personally viewed a CIA dossier on the primary suspect, and if the intelligence community would even permit the FBI director to access such a file if it existed. Patel's vocabulary instantly shifted into a highly defensive posture. He adamantly refused to confirm the existence of any covert CIA file. Crucially, he also refused to explicitly deny its existence. Instead, he deployed heavily conditional phrasing, discussing what might happen if such a file exists, if another agency chose to share it, or if it suddenly became available. This rhetorical strategy does not constitute an answer. It constructs a defensive perimeter. Carefully analyze the glaring omissions in his testimony. Patel offered no assurance that the FBI had proactively and aggressively hunted down every fragmented piece of intelligence-related data. He provided zero confirmation regarding full, unhindered cooperation from sister agencies. He merely stated that his bureau had reviewed whatever materials they were passively handed. Passively reviewing provided documents and actively hunting for deliberately withheld intelligence represent two vastly different operational realities. One approach naively assumes total transparency, while the other demands it. In a complex case where survivors explicitly named 20 powerful figures, where official records hint at deep intelligence entanglements, and where zero investigations materialized, this operational difference is absolutely critical. The established pattern ceases to look like a series of isolated bureaucratic errors. Survivor testimonies exist, explicit names exist, official documents exist, and massive intelligence red flags exist. Yet, at every single juncture, the institutional response remains identical, highly conditional, continuously deferred, and woefully incomplete. This terrifying realization leads directly to Massie's final pressure point. He chose not to conclude his interrogation strictly on this single case. Instead, he widened the analytical lens one final time. He deliberately introduced two distinctly different federal investigations: the unresolved pipe bombs from January 6th and the catastrophic mass shooting in Las Vegas. Both cases remain stubbornly unresolved. Both cases triggered massive, relentless investigative efforts. Both cases consumed staggering amounts of FBI funding and manpower over several years. Massie simply asked Patel to detail the concrete progress achieved in these massive manhunts. Patel responded that the pipe bomb inquiry remained a highly active, ongoing operation, demonstrating forward progress. Regarding the Las Vegas tragedy, he lacked any specific details and promised to follow up at a later date. Massie did not need to explicitly explain the devastating contrast he just established. It was radiantly visible to everyone watching. In those specific cases, the federal government willingly deploys infinite resources to chase nameless phantoms, desperately searching for identities and constructing complex leads from microscopic fragments. Conversely, in the scandal involving 20 high-profile individuals, the victims handed the agency the exact names on a silver platter, yet the entire investigative apparatus remained completely frozen. This undeniable contrast represents the exact moment the official narrative inverted completely. This scandal was never truly about a tragic lack of actionable intelligence. It was always about the agency's calculated response after receiving explosive information. Massie did not inject wild conspiracy theories into the chamber. He injected the government's own official record. He highlighted the FD 302 reports, the detailed victim statements, the explicitly named individuals, and the stunning admission from an FBI director who testified under oath that he never bothered to personally read the documents containing those names. Then, Massie introduced the final document that quietly locked this horrifying reality into place. It was a completely unsigned memorandum, dated the 7th of July, 2025, which entered the official congressional record without any formal objection. This memo stated in plain, unambiguous language that the agency uncovered absolutely no evidence capable of predicating a new investigation into uncharged third parties. Read that clinical phrasing carefully. The memo does not boldly claim that the names do not exist. It does not deny that horrific allegations were formally made. It simply declares that none of this staggering evidence reaches the arbitrary threshold required to simply begin looking. This is not a final legal conclusion regarding guilt or innocence. It is a preemptive administrative decision to look the other way. This is where the standard logic of law enforcement shatters beyond repair. In any conventional federal prosecution, victim statements explicitly identifying attackers are never casually dismissed at the starting line. They inherently function as the starting line. They automatically trigger intense interrogations, aggressive subpoenas, forensic financial tracing, exhaustive travel analysis, and relentless corroboration efforts. They mandate extreme effort, yet, according to the official government record, these specific statements triggered absolute silence. We are forced to ask what corrupted standard the system is applying. What invisible threshold allows the government to decide that 20 specific individuals, named by actual victims within official FBI documentation, do not even warrant a basic preliminary inquiry? Massie demanded an answer to this vital question, yet a genuine answer never materialized. Instead, the agency distributed the blame across a vast network of regional offices, spanning multiple past administrations, relying on the decisions of unnamed prosecutors who conveniently cannot be questioned inside a committee room. This strategic distribution achieves one highly specific goal: the total eradication of accountability. If everyone supposedly agreed to do nothing, then nobody can be held personally responsible. If an abstract system made the final call, then no individual official faces scrutiny. If the exculpatory memorandum remains suspiciously unsigned, no author must defend its logic. This is the exact mechanism by which massive institutional decisions turn invisible, relying not on overt secrecy, but on labyrinthine bureaucratic structure. The crushing moral weight of this congressional hearing ultimately rests right here. Behind every single sanitized 302 report breathes a real human being, a traumatized survivor who sat down with federal authorities and bravely recounted exactly what transpired. They provided the names. They absorbed the immense risk of going on the record. They operated under the assumption that formally documenting their trauma would finally trigger a pursuit of justice. Translate this abstract concept into a tangible reality. Imagine walking into a local precinct, explicitly identifying the individual who victimized you, providing exact dates and context, only to be flatly informed that your detailed statement does not meet their arbitrary threshold to even look into the matter. Imagine experiencing zero follow-up, zero active inquiry, and zero ultimate accountability. This scenario does not represent a failure of evidentiary gathering. It represents a catastrophic failure of institutional will. When this specific type of failure consistently benefits the ultra-powerful billionaires, elite political figures, and globally connected titans, it ceases to resemble a string of unfortunate coincidences. It solidifies into a terrifying pattern. It reveals a system functioning flawlessly, exactly as it was designed to operate. The machine proves wildly aggressive when hunting an unknown suspect. It remains absolutely relentless when the target is an ordinary citizen. Yet, it becomes incredibly careful, practically immobile, the moment the implicated names wield massive societal power. Stating this reality does not make one a conspiracy theorist. It makes one an observant student of comparative reality. The FBI possesses the stamina to spend years hunting a faceless suspect in a pipe bomb case. It gladly deploys astronomical resources to map out the psychological motives behind a mass shooting. It routinely follows microscopic threads, completely devoid of attached names. However, when victims hand them 20 explicit names, the formidable machinery violently grinds to a halt. It does not stop because it lacks the capacity to proceed. It stops purely because it chooses not to. That singular distinction changes the entire landscape. If the baseline standard for initiating a federal investigation is selectively applied based on status, the law itself devolves into a selectively applied weapon. It may remain impartial in the written code, but it is deeply corrupted in real-world application. The question Thomas Massie successfully forced into the permanent record stretches far beyond one specific scandal. It asks us this: do the sworn statements of victims only matter when they implicate the weak and powerless, or do they hold equal weight when they point directly upward at the elite? If they do not carry equal weight, we must accept that the justice system is not actually broken. It is perfectly calibrated. It is meticulously calibrated to absorb damaging intelligence, quietly document it, permanently archive it, and abruptly halt all momentum the second action becomes politically or socially inconvenient. No official dared to vocalize that horrific truth during the hearing. Nevertheless, it is precisely what the undeniable documentation proves. The heavy burden of proof now permanently shifts. It does not fall upon the victims, as they have already spoken their truth. It does not fall upon the evidence, because it securely exists within the archives. The burden falls squarely upon the massive institutions that collected this intelligence and actively chose paralysis. Once evidence enters the official congressional record, it cannot be magically erased. It patiently waits. It waits for aggressive oversight, for incoming subpoenas, and for leaders willing to relentlessly ask the exact same questions while refusing to accept hollow deflections. Therefore, the ultimate question remains painfully clear. If 20 identities, securely documented within official FBI files and provided directly by survivors, cannot trigger a simple investigation, what possibly could? Even more importantly, who holds the supreme authority to make that terrifying decision? If you firmly believe this massive question demands a transparent answer, do not let the momentum die here. Hit the like button to ensure this analysis reaches a broader audience. Drop your thoughts in the comments because the implications extend far beyond a single committee hearing. Share this breakdown with anyone who naively believes our justice system applies the law equally to all citizens. And remember to subscribe because this dark saga is far from over.